Greetings, I am James D. Mills, and welcome back, or welcome for the first time if this is your first time here. For this video, we are going to be talking a little bit about the genre of local color fiction, and specifically about The Outcasts of Poker Flat by Bret Harte. Now, I know what you might be thinking. This is kind of a strange thing to talk about outside of a literature college class, and you'd probably be right. However, while I was writing a paper for one such class, I realized something very interesting about this story. And if you are not familiar, it has to do with the way that local color fiction evokes the kind of feeling that it is aiming for. Local color fiction is a genre of literature from the late 19th century that went into the early 20th century. And there's a lot of different things that people say that kind of make it up, but the core of it is that there's basically going to be an attempt at evoking a sort of evoking a tone and an aesthetic from a certain era in a very specific region, depending on where the author was from. This could be describing the landscape, having people utilize their dialects and their cultural norms, describing locations, any sort of thing like that. Now, in The Outcasts of Poker Flat, what the author does is that he uses a lot of symbolism with trees. And this is very interesting, because at first, on the first read through, the story doesn't seem like anything special. It's just, a tragedy. It's kind of like a Western, and it definitely is that sort of period piece to local color, regionalist sort of feel. But then when you read it again, you realize how important the trees really are. And we're just going to jump right into it. See, the author uses specific species of trees that are common in the American West and evokes an amount of symbolism from them in order to get a kind of greater effect from key points of the story. He uses them for foreshadowing, and he uses them as ways to drive home a point that he's trying to make. Now, most trees can be found in multiple different parts of the world. However, one thing that I kind of learned when I moved to a certain area was how important the sycamore tree was in our region. Specifically, there's a sort of reverence that people have in their hearts for it, even to the point where Purdue University's literary journal is called the Sycamore Review. And there's many other things in the state of Indiana that are related to sycamores. Now, The Outcasts of Poker Flat takes place in California, more than likely. However, the use of the sycamore tree in the beginning of it is extremely deliberate and very poignant. A secret committee had determined to rid the town of all improper persons. This was done permanently in regard of two men who were then hanging from the boughs of a sycamore in the gulch, and temporarily in the banishment of certain other objectionable characters. So the sycamore tree is symbolically very powerful in this sort of scene. There are two dead men hanging from its branches. And this is in contrast to a biblical story where a tax collector from Jericho named Zacchaeus climbs a sycamore tree in order to get a view of Jesus, and in that moment kind of like is reborn spiritually. What I believe the author is trying to do here is that these two dead men hanging from a sycamore, which is intended to symbolize rejuvenation and spiritual rebirth, he's kind of taking the spirits of these men and delivering them right onto God, right? Just allowing their spirits to be rebirthed in the most dark and macabre way possible. And this is done also intentionally to foreshadow the rest of the story, which, if you're not familiar, follows many of whom are actually also named after trees, funny enough. Towards the middle of the story, we see more foreshadowing. As the shadows crept slowly up the mountain, a slight breeze rocked the tops of the pine trees and moaned through their long and gloomy aisles. The ruined cabin, patched and covered with pine boughs, was set apart for the ladies. As the lovers parted, they unaffectedly exchanged a kiss, so honest and sincere that it might have been heard above the swaying pines. Now, in a short story, when repetition is used like that, the word pines is being used 3 times in a single paragraph. The author wants us to pay attention to that. So basically, every mention of it is foreshadowing a different event. The breeze above the pine trees is foreshadowing the snowstorm that's going to come down and ultimately lead to the death of everybody. The pine boughs that they're using to patch the cabin, the word bow is used again, which is the word that was used with the hanging men on the sycamore. So it's kind of calling back to that. Uh, and it's quite appropriate because two people are going to be freezing to death in the cabin around the bows, as to where there were two people who were hanging from the tree before. And then in the last one, I think it's supposed to evoke a kind of a sense of, it's evoking a sense of love that is just smiling in the face of a certain icy death. The last little element I wanted to talk about with this story was the death of the primary character, Mr. Oakhurst. But at the head of the gulch, on one of the largest pine trees, they found the deuce of clubs pinned to the bark with a bowie knife. It bore the following, written in pencil, in a firm hand. Beneath this tree lies the body of John Oakhurst, who struck a streak of bad luck on the 23rd of November, 1850, and handed in his checks on the 7th December, 1850. And pulseless and cold, with a derringer by his side and a bullet in his heart, though still calm as in life, beneath the snow lay he who was at once the strongest and yet the weakest of the outcasts of Poker Flat. I think the knee-jerk reaction to this scene is that Mr. Oakhurst, being a gambler, saw the odds of his own survival and everybody else's survival and decided to fold and take his own life rather than letting the weather do it. However, being that he pinned his own epitaph with that playing card on a pine tree, and pines, uh, similarly to the sycamore tree, are thought to represent everlasting life and immortality because of their ability to keep their needles and their leaves during the winter. It really changes the context of this death. I think what the author is really suggesting here is that he's gambling on the notion that there is an immortal life for him after this, that there's actually a better way than suffering through this winter. He's kind of taking it into his own hands, and rather than folding, he's going all in. He's putting all of his chips on like a mediocre hand, and he really has no idea what he's doing, and he's doing it with the same. The text mentions how calm he is in death, just like how he was in life. He went into his own grave with a poker face, the same way that he faced everything else in life. And there's a bit of I think it's an interesting end to the story because the character had agency, and everyone else who died in the story didn't. And so there's a bit of something to think about there. So yeah, I hope that little analysis was enjoyable. It really tickled my fancy and got me inspired to write quite a bit today while I was working on that assignment. And I thought I would share it all with you fine folks, whoever would be watching this video. If you like what I do, you can find me somewhere. I'm starting to work on my website to post things on my blog and to share things that I'm writing out with the people. Part of that is a Ko-fi, if you were inclined to donate and help me bring some of my literary projects off the ground. And then on top of that, I'm also on Twitter. I made a new Twitter and have been kind of just working on tightening up all the stuff to promote the work that I do. So if you enjoy, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.